Hi, Sarah.
Hey folks,
How you doing?
good. How are you?
Good. I know you're pressed for time, so we can do introductions. Renee Johnson, president of the Silicon Valley Rainbow Rotary, and Cheryl
Club service director, Rainbow Rotary. You know me.
and Betty.
I'm Betty O. I'm the board president of the Rainbow Chamber of Commerce.
Very cool. And an honored guest.
Honored
And,
guest.
Rourke.
Yeah, I'm PR chair for the Rotary Club.
Oh, cool. Francis. Are you there?
Yes, sorry, club member and youth service.
Okay. Karen.
Wife of Cheryl Lander.
And Isabel.
I am Isabel. I am the secretary and interim treasurer.
Yay!
And driving.
I'm driving.
Driving, okay.
Drive safe.
So we have a tendency to have people pop in as we're late. Let people start late anyway. So you may end up having more members here. Cheryl, you want to do the introductions?
No, I think we should just get into it because Sarah doesn't have much time. So Sarah's with the Office of LGBTQ Affairs for the Santa Clara County. And so, Sarah, whatever you want to talk about, you have a half hour, I know, with us. So, whatever you'd like to talk about, current job, what you did at Microsoft, your journey, advocacy, you name it. Just buzz on through a couple of topics and we can, I guess, stop you if we have questions, if you're game for that, and just see where it goes in the next half hour.
Yeah, I'm totally game for it if that's okay with you folks. I do have up until like 7:15 because this is like conflicting with my HRC monthly meeting, so we have meetings at the same time. But super delighted to be able to join you folks, and thank you so much for introducing each and every one of you and introducing yourself. My name is Sera Fernando. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a proud queer transgender Filipino woman. Super delighted to be here. And if you folks want, like I do have a kind of like a slide deck prepared, so I could just, I could share. Ooh, if I could get like co-host access, I'll be able to share my screen.
Oh, wait a minute. Come on, Johnson. Let me. You figure after all this time, there you go. You can share.
Yay! Thank you so much. So like this is I think a slide deck's easier because it just allows me to kind of like talk about some of the things I wanted to discuss. And I know some of the topics that you folks were talking about is in regards to trans day visibility, the trans community, and all stuff like that. And I do have like information or slides on Transgender Day of Visibility because I did something actually for our behavioral health department. They're the only ones that got to see this entire presentation. This is only like a 30-minute version, a slimmed down, but you still get 100% Sarah. So consider yourselves lucky. It's just like, again, like I'm more than happy to share a little bit about my journey, and I know some of the things that we want to talk about is my journey from Microsoft to the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, and some of the things that I'll be talking about includes this terminology. And what I'll do after this call, Cheryl, I will send you kind of like a glossary of like a lot of terms that I have, but some of these terms like covering, like misgendering, and like intersectionality aren't like those typical terms you might hear in LGBTQ spaces. So I always like having these kind of terminologies. So when I talk about covering, it's really just hiding my identity or going stealth, as we call it in the transgender community. When I talk about intersectionality, it's the multiple overlapping identities that I have and the way I experience life with these overlapping pieces of identity, and how there's more parts to marginalizations the more identities that folks have that impact the way we just go through life. So these are some just terminologies or terms that I use, but in terms of like my coming out process, just so you folks know, this is totally not me. This is actually activist and model Gina Rosero, who is a proud queer transgender Filipino woman. And when she came out on the most profound stage. So she actually came out on a TED Talk. And before that, she really focuses her career on modeling. So she immigrated from the Philippines to New York City. Well, actually to San Francisco first, then to New York City to have a career in modeling. And it wasn't until this TED Talk stage where she revealed that she was transgender. And to me, that was just like a very uplifting moment. First off, because I thought that I was going to be the most famous transgender Filipino woman in the United States. But lo and behold, I got beat out by a supermodel, but that's totally okay. Or so I say to myself. But if you haven't had a chance to check out her TED Talk, it's very inspiring. And for me as a transgender Filipino woman, I looked at her in terms of seeking identity and how to navigate being trans and what it means to be transgender. So this is actually me. So this is me just traveling in Japantown. And in terms of how I identify as intersectional. And when I say intersectional, what I mean is that when I say I'm a queer trans Filipino woman, I mean just that all these identities are part of me and my own like upbringing. My parents were first generation immigrants, so I actually was born and raised here in the Bay Area, specifically in the South Bay. My dad was in the Navy, my mom was an accountant. And they worked hard to be able to, have and provide for their children and eventually extended family who they supported migrating here. So my experience with growing up is really based on this colonized kind of like identity. Since my dad was in the military, I was brought up in a very conservative, very religious kind of background. I still identify as a Catholic, even though I don't necessarily go to church. I'm like a CEO, so Christmas and Easter only. Even that is a stretch because I don't even go during then. But as a Catholic and kind of like having that conflict of being transgender and seeing how trans folks are viewed by a lot of folks within conservative religious backgrounds, it's this very kind of like odd mix of like, am I accepted in this space? Will I be welcome? Should I even go? Should I even bother? But in terms of intersectionality, just finding identity and how people interact with me. When people see me for the first time, it's always they see trans before they see woman, before they see Filipina, before they see queer, before they see even like no one even knows about my sexual orientation. And I know when it comes to the LGBTQ community, sexual orientation plays a big deal when it comes to identity, right? I identify as ace, so it's in terms of exploring, kind of like my sexual orientation, from moving to pansexual to bisexual to biromantic then to ace. It's very nuanced in how I explore, but that never gets brought up because how I am on the exterior, a transgender Filipino woman, specifically transgender, is how people perceive me as. And that's why I just want to go in spaces and let them know transgender is not the only way I experience this world. I experience this world through different multiple intersections. One example is when this Stop Asian Hate movement, right? When that started up, it actually started up one full year ago when I was biking down in hitting Willow Glen and feeling the eyes of people when people were just like so afraid of other people. I remember very distinctly catching like stink eyes from folks being like an Asian woman. I don't know if they identified me as queer because I had my mask on, but just not feeling welcome on a bike ride. And I also remember like doing walks here in my local neighborhood and just people, even though, I mean, maybe I'm taking it the wrong way, sure, but there are moments when people would just like see me from a distance and just like go across the street just because of the fact that here's this Asian that's walking down. So how I experience the world, a lot of times it's trans, but it also could be that intersection of Asian, right? So in terms of like, even I speak a lot at these Stop Asian Hate rallies, and they want to hear from a queer voice, but a lot of folks fail to remember that I'm also Asian. I'm also, a Filipino woman. I'm also a woman. So there's those. So those are different identities where I could actually lean in with my perspective. So I identify as intersectional. And in terms of my career, like this is my my famous Sera in front of all sorts of microphones kind of like pictures. So what started me off in my activism is just being able to be given the platform and share my story. And it was really Microsoft, not necessarily my day-to-day job as a retail manager, right? So if you ever visited Valley Fair, there used to be a Microsoft store there, no longer in existence. That shut down as of last year. But just being able to access their employee resource group, their LGBTQ employee resource group, and listen to the different experiences of trans folks, as well as the different experiences of the entire LGBTQ community, and being able to get the resources to be able just to tell my own narrative, to tell my own story, to have kind of like these I remember very distinctly that they gave me the opportunity to have a consultant or like an advisor, just to talk through whatever I want to talk through. It was not structured. It was not grounded in anything. Whatever I wanted to do, it was just like a success coach that they hired for me, and I was just like, that's weird. Like, I didn't know what to do. But what ended up happening is that this success coach pushed me to go to what do you call those Toastmaster events. I don't know if you folks know about Toastmasters, but learning how to craft your speech, learning how to craft your story, and just getting your story out there to the world. And once I took those kind of like trainings and those resources, I just gained that confidence to just be a little bit more revealing with my story, being a little bit more vulnerable on stage, and being very raw in terms of the emotion that comes out. So a lot of this kind of like this desire, this want, this calling was really just like this led to kind of like the tools I needed when I saw Gino Rosero on stage and being able to do her TED Talk. So it's just like, yeah, this actually feels right. Being able to talk to my story, tell my story. And what ended up happening is that I just got a little bit more deeper involved, not just in storytelling, but what can we do to tell the story of other trans folks? How can we pass this microphone? How can we empower marginalized communities? How can we empower trans folks to be able to learn how to tell their story in a compelling way? Learn how to talk about allyship, learn how to ask what is needed from LGB folks, right? From allies, from straight communities, from like companies, from families. Like, what do we need? How can we do it? And my method is always tell your story. Get that empathy, get that compassion, use that as bait. Your story is your power. And once you got them, be able to ask in the most profound way what you need from them. That's how we build allies. Now, one quote, again, I always think about Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the word intersectionality. I just feel that this really speaks to me. If we aren't intersectional, some of us, the most vulnerable, are going to fall through the cracks. So in terms of uplifting the intersectional voice, Black trans women, immigrant trans women, queer folks of color, like all this like richness that we have within our own communities, we should really tap into that, because I really feel that those that are closest to the pain, those people should be closest to the power when it comes to telling their stories, because I think that that will bring the liberation of trans and queer folks alike. Now, as for Transgender Day of Visibility, I don't know if you folks know, but Transgender Day of Visibility, we just celebrated that. So happy Transgender Day of Visibility. It happens every March 31st. And it's dedicated to celebrating trans folks worldwide. And it also raises awareness around the discrimination that trans folks face. So this was founded by activist Rachel Crandall. And Rachel Crandall thought that this would be the kind of like the polar opposite event of Transgender Day of Remembrance. And if you folks don't know about Transgender Day of Remembrance, Transgender Day of Remembrance is a day where we honor the lives lost due to anti-trans brutality and anti-trans violence. Last year alone, around 44 trans folks were murdered for either being trans or for being somewhere that how their identity has affected them. So whether it's homelessness, whether it's lack of employment, whether it's just like living in impoverished neighborhoods, or using like finding different ways of survival work, such as, you know, survival crimes, survival sex work. Those are things that are very real to the community. And unfortunately, that type of marginalization causes trans folks to be marginalized at an alarming rate, to the point where we experience violence higher than almost any group, especially Black trans women. So Transgender Day of Visibility is a way for us to be able to celebrate the fabulousness, the authenticity, to be out there, to be visible. And this is where I really center my work in terms of storytelling. In terms of how it's going, there is now, since 2009, when we had our first Transgender Day of Visibility event, there's a stronger understanding of trans-affirming care. There's increased visibility. I don't know if you folks feel it, but I mean, we just had Elliot Page that came out, actor that came out very publicly and very recently. And there's more and more folks coming out as trans and non-binary. I don't know if you folks know, but around 20% of youth identify as LGBTQ+. So it's something to really think about in terms of where we're going with visibility, with inclusion. And there's also greater acceptance of trans folks. And I just want to put an asterisk right over there, because although there's like this greater acceptance, I mean, there's studies done by Williams Institute saying that 73% of respondents in their research of just like, straight identified people feel that trans folks should be protected from discrimination. They feel that trans folks, should be allowed to have gender-affirming surgery, and more than half want the U.S. to do more when it comes to ensuring that trans folks feel protected. But how it actually is going right now, around 62% of trans folks experience discrimination within the past year, and we're talking about 2020 numbers, y'all, right before the pandemic. Around a quarter feel mental health disparities and have endured significant psychological harm, and that leads to higher rates of depression, anxiety, and unfortunately suicide with the transgender community. And around 2/3 of trans folks cover their identity so that they could just fit in. And this is a very, very real number. Me working at the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, like this wild activist that they're getting, right? I did a study and saw, I thought that what better way to find out kind of like how trans folks feel in the workplace than doing a survey. And what I found out from the survey is that this number, when it comes to covering, is actually like 66%. That is indicative of how folks at the county feel that they have to cover their identity just to be able to, live their authenticity, or even they have to hide their authenticity. Then we really get into the real numbers. So again, 84 anti-trans bills this year, 2021, are currently in legislation right now. I don't know if you folks have been following Arkansas, this whole seesaw effect, when like there are call banks set up, urging the veto of the anti-trans health bill that was eventually vetoed on Monday and then overridden on Tuesday. So Arkansas has outlawed trans youth from receiving gender-affirming care. What that will lead to higher rates of depression, higher rates of suicide, just like this uneasiness and just like this icky feeling of not feeling included. This has to stop, and this also goes towards trans girls in sports, having folks like the spread of misinformation in terms of like trans girls are, or regular cisgender girls don't feel safe around trans girls. This is something that is so misguided and misinterpreted. There is no data that says that cis girls feel unsafe around trans girls, especially around youth, and having these laws not allowing trans youth to participate in sports based on gender identity. This is something where it's rooted in oppression, in white supremacy. It's rooted in ways where we marginalize and continually marginalize folks, especially folks of color, because if you do your research, you'll find that a lot of the pictures that are out there are black trans women competing against other trans folks, or not trans folks, but against cis folks in these sports. So we really have to take a critical eye when we look at, who's really feeling safe in these moments, right? Unfortunately, this year alone, 12 trans folks have been fallen victim to anti-trans violence, 6 of them being trans women of color. So really eye-opening things in terms of like, this is what's actually going on. So in terms of understanding the coming out process, and this is a process that I'm sure plenty of you folks might be familiar with, coming out, it's hard. It's a difficult process. It's a challenge. Coming out to loved ones, coming out to friends, coming out to coworkers. There's this constant fear of coming out, and coming out just does not happen in one time. It happens multiple times. Me coming out as transgender, me coming out as queer, me coming out as asexual, me coming out, like, this is a constant thing where you just don't know how people are going to accept you, right? But when you think about the benefits of coming out, that feeling of empowerment, that feeling of increased self-esteem, that feeling of like being your authentic self, this is so important in terms of identity. This leads to healthier outcomes when it comes to just living your life. So when it comes to rejecting behaviors, and one thing I wanted to point out is that if someone comes out as transgender or even LGBTQ, right? Some of the rejecting behaviors, such as blaming, shaming, excluding, saying that like, oh, like, don't go out with me if you're dressed like that, or you shouldn't, like, if you didn't wear nail polish, then you wouldn't get bullied. These kind of rejecting behaviors, these microaggressions, or even just straight up aggressions, this leads to unhealthy outcomes. And some of the stats I have over here, this is from the U.S. trans survey that was held in 2015. From unsupported families, around 50% of folks experience homelessness. From unsupported families, around 54% of folks attempted suicide. And from unsupported families, around 45 experienced serious psychological distress. And this is all just stemming from rejecting behaviors, and it could be as small as misgendering, and I'm not even going to call that small. It could be as small as just like giving kind of like that look, and it's just like, or just like that just rejecting behavior, all the way up to saying like, I don't want you near me. These are things that lead to unhealthy outcomes. But when you look at what happens when you actually have accepting behaviors, when you require respect in a space, when you show outwardly that you support their decision, when you advocate for the community, and when you express affection. I love your hair. I love that you shared this with me. I love you. You are beautiful. Like these things really, really matter. And I love the queer community because every time I see folks that are like, I just know it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe they're superheroes. They're superheroes in my book. When I always see people that are queer, it's always that there's just always like this bond of expressing affection, whether it's I like this or I see that, like that validation, it means a lot and it goes a long way. For me, it means higher self-esteem. For me, it's just wanting to have a closer relationship, getting to know someone by name. It's belief in becoming healthier as we get older, and it's just overall a healthier outcome, right? And there has been studies by the Trevor Project that actually prove this. When it comes to the social aspect, children, trans, non-binary, and gender diverse children who have transitioned at a very early age and have access to these resources in terms of health access, they actually experience the same levels of anxiety, depression, and all that as their cisgender counterparts. When youth have medical access, that positive body image reduces the rate of suicidality, and that's something important to think about. And also when it comes to a legal aspect, I just know when I got my name and my gender pronoun changed on my birth certificate, my driver's license, and all the necessary documents, like in my community, I don't know about like other communities, but we just call it milestones. And there's just so many beautiful milestones along the way, and just having that name, it might seem very small to call someone by their chosen name, right? But to actually have it legally changed, it's a big deal because it validates your existence. So, in terms of just interacting with trans, non-binary, or just folks in general, you might have this conflict figuring out how to interact with someone that comes out as trans or non-binary. If you look conflicted or you have that kind of rejecting behavior, that will lead into a negative health outcome. But if you are still conflicted, and it's okay to be conflicted, but if you don't display that, rather show affirming behavior, acknowledging them, saying thank you for sharing that with me, being there for them, and being able to advocate, that leads to healthy outcomes. So some of the language that could be damaging, and this is some of the language that I've heard and some of the language that's been said to me. And I'm not going to go through all of them because, just for the sake of time. But in terms of some of the ones that resonate with me real well, this one where it says, as long as it's not around grandma, that was actually said to me during multiple times during holidays. And that's damaging because that just, then why should I even go to those parties? Why should I even be just cutting off family right then and there and having someone tell me that I can't be around family? That's so just damaging in terms of my mental health and just being able to fit in. Why didn't you tell me, or you should have told me? This is actually a very real thing when trans folks choose to disclose their gender, especially in romantic relationships. And it's funny because people say this, but regardless if a trans person discloses their gender identity or their transgender identity, whether it's up front when they first meet or whether it's down the line when things get really serious, our lives are still at risk regardless. So it does not matter why you shouldn't tell me. It's just because I'm just fearful of my safety. Let's be real. And the last one that was damaging to me personally was I need time to mourn. And that really just hurt me because my mom said that to me, and it took, because I just didn't know the time. I didn't know how long this time to mourn would be. When I needed my parents the most, that took 2 years. And that's 2 years where I could have used the support of family, of friends, of people that I would want there during this big part of my life. And eventually, like my family did come around. Not all of them, but most of them, especially my own parents. But when you center this kind of like this experience around yourself and not necessarily that person that's coming out to you in the most profound way, that could be very damaging. So language that could build trust. Thank you for trusting me with this information. Who else would you like to be out to? How has your experience been so far? You're really courageous for coming out. How do you want me to refer to you in front of ours? Would you like to keep this between us? And my most favorite one, let me know how I can support you. This was said to me by team members at Microsoft. And this is why I hold Microsoft in a very, very high light. And it's not just Microsoft, don't get me wrong. They're a great brand, right? This is how allyship looks within a team. Being able to support one another. Being able to express that in a profound way. And being able to let them know that they could be leaned on and that they could be that resource for you if you need anything. If everything else falls apart, I have this person I could go to. So Gina Rosero, all of us are put in boxes by our family, by our religion, by our society, our moment in history, even our own bodies. Some of us have the courage to break free. And that's Gina Rosero. That's a little bit about myself. If one thing, here's some more information. I'll drop this in the chat, but actually you could just throw me an email. I'll send my email to you folks. Transgender policy is underway at County of Santa Clara, and this is a project that I'm leading, as well as this great acceleration for resources. So if you want to learn about sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, if you want to learn about how to create transgender policy, if you want to learn, and this is some of the work that I'm doing right now at Office of LGBTQ Affairs, if you want to learn how to hire trans and non-binary folks and make your workplaces affirming and your spaces affirming of trans folks, that's in the pipeline, but I'm more than happy to share all that information. But for the sake of time, I'm going to open up to a little bit of Q&A. And if you didn't know, that's Gina Rosero right there when I met her at HRC. So thank you folks for your time, and I'm more than happy to take questions. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end slideshow. I'm going to stop sharing right there.
You're muted, Cheryl.
I know, I noticed. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sarah. I've known you from Microsoft days.
Yeah.
And, admire you a lot, admire your courage and your bravery. And, I know that you're doing great things with the county, and, we'll look to follow you and get engaged. And, we're hoping that our Rotary Club can have a good connection with the county and, look for opportunities to collaborate in the future. So thank you for sharing. Very good.
Definitely. I know Renee and Betty, I always see you folks at the monthly call. So there's again, any opportunity to collaborate, just definitely let us know. One thing I didn't tell about in my story is that again, kind of like how I got my job at county was just like this diligence with diversity and inclusion, and using kind of like my employee resource group as and all the resources I learned from there as kind of like my springboard to get my role at the Office of LGBTQ Affairs. So Office of LGBTQ Affairs, Senior Management Analyst in charge of transgender programming and policy. And a lot of the work I do is just like, if I could put my kind of like my life's work in a nutshell, it's like, how can we create affirming spaces for everyone to live authentically? So that's what I do.
And you feel like you get good support from the county to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is that I work for the Division of Equity and Social Justice, and I feel that they take personal lived experience in a very high regard, especially in our division. And in terms of just subject matter expertise and what I bring to the table and everything like that, I feel that my voice is very much valued and listened to. The only challenge is that how do you put this into a ledge file? You know what I mean? Because now that we have kind of like this representation, how can we make this into actual policy? How can we make this into a movement that uplifts all marginalized identities within the transgender community? And not just that, but how do we kind of like string it along together with like, you know, Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, you know, and making sure that we do everything that we can to help the immigrant community. So it's all of these kind of like systemic levels of oppression that we need to problem solve day in to day out. And I feel that my expertise within the trans community is highly valued, not only from a trans lens, but also from an intersectional lens.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing all that work, Sarah.
Yeah, no problem. I just cut away some of the slides from from my deck. I was just like, oh, I could just present this.
I find that for me, it's interesting being a little bit older than some of the members in the Rotary, the changing nomenclature, the way people refer to themselves. It's kind of hard to keep up because it's fluid. It's very, very fluid. As I think as people discover themselves, they don't want to be pigeonholed. So because of that, the fluidity of the names, how they refer to themselves, it's really, I find very interesting. I don't find it off-putting. I just don't want to insult anybody or any of that, you know, to make them feel uncomfortable. But it's hard, especially, you know, coming from my background way back, coming out when I was, you know, I mean, I came out when I was 16 and in 1970, 75, yeah, 75, 70, 70, yeah, 75, something like that. So it's hard.
And
Well, again, it's habit, right? I mean, you have
Yeah.
to break the habit, right?
No,
Yeah.
and it's just, and it's not that I find it difficult. It's just I want to be aware and sensitive to it. That's my concern, is that I don't, like I said, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or appear insensitive to anybody. And so it's just like you said, it's just keeping up. I mean, I was shocked when people were using the term queer, because when I came out, you weren't queer. You know, I mean, that was not a term you used. It was a derogatory term. And I was like, wow, really? So
Yeah.
it's, you know, and in your case, Sarah, I mean, some of the terms used, I go, okay, all right. But and like I said, it's the fluidity of it all. And it's cool. I mean, I find it very heartwarming because of the fluidity. So you don't have to be pigeonholed, because I didn't like being pigeonholed when I was coming out and as I progressed through my years. So I thought it was good.
Yeah, in terms of queer, I use queer as a way of kind of like explaining my sexual orientation as well as gender identity, because I could just say queer and that could mean like so many things. And I could use that as kind of like a catch-all term so that I don't have to reveal all these intersections, especially when I feel that my safety might be in danger. So that could be a form of covering for me, but I like using the word queer just because that, like, for me, my experience with sexual orientation has been very fluid. So, and it's not to say that, like, you know, I'm bisexual one day, pansexual the next. It's just like, just trying to just find my own space and my own identity. And also not having to necessarily break down what asexual biromantic really means. Sometimes it gets pretty exhausting, so just using a one-syllable word does help out. And only if people allow me the space will I explain a little bit about, you know, my experience with sexuality as well as gender identity and things like that. But yeah, in terms of just like understanding kind of like the movements that are going on, to understand identity, it's really being respectful in terms of like how one identifies is really holds so much meaning to them. how they come out and how they share that information. It's valuable and trusted information, and a lot of times, especially with youth, it could be confidential information because youth could come out to you, like you folks, because you identify with the LGBTQ community, right? They might come out to you, but they have not come out to their parents or their friends or some of their soul. So, like, getting this trusted information, just know that it takes so much for like someone to reveal themselves to someone else, and how people react to it. If it's within a negative life, or if they're questioned, then that could actually lead to unhealthy health outcomes. So it's really understanding that, like, having that compassion, having that empathy, being okay to make mistakes. Not everyone's gonna get pronouns right, but it's okay to just just know that you are in the process of learning, and just like correct yourself in the moment and just move on. So it's just like if you call someone she and they say, and you realize, oh, I mean them. So it's just like, hey, it's like, oh, she, I mean them, sorry. And you just move on. You don't have to bring so much attention to that detail. It's okay, because if we don't learn from our mistakes, if we don't have this growth mindset, then how are you going to actually learn? So just centering, just the centering and respecting people's like lived experiences and their identity. It's imperative in terms of creating this sense of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we know you need to go. So
Yeah.
But again, like, thank you folks so much for this space. Let me know if you need anything from a Silicon Valley Pride lens, from a human rights campaign lens, or from an Office of LGBTQ Affairs lens. Always here to support y'all. Love the work that you folks are doing, and I look forward to collaborating even deeper in the future.
Thank you very much.
All right.
thank you.
Folks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.